They told me for years there was no money in podcasting. Well, they were all wrong.
How did you get into podcasting? Even though you don't have one of your own, you've been a guest on 200 plus podcasts. So out of your magnificent career and all of your accomplishments, how did you get into podcasting?
When you have a book out, the way to promote it, because no one goes on tours, no one goes city to city and let me do book signings. That's barely done normally, and certainly during a pandemic, that was not happening at all. The way to promote a book is to go on podcasts. And my friend Dory Clark, when I went to her for advice as I was writing the book, she said, you need to get yourself on lots of podcasts. I said, all right, that's the goal. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, anyone who has a book or a record, if you're an artist, or something new, you want to get the word out, podcasts are the best way to do it because you're hitting a targeted market with a relevant message.
Mm-hmm. So what's been the biggest benefit of being a guest on multiple people's podcasts? You know, it can be financially for your book, but it can also be plenty of other reasons. Like what do you get out of being a podcast other than selling your book?
Yeah, obviously selling the book gets out there and builds my name and brand. I have met some fantastic people. The people who do podcasts are usually the more interesting people. They have the podcast for a reason. Mm-hmm. They're interested in the topic. They're excited and engaged in that topic. And you get to meet these people. So whatever you do, whatever your field is, when you talk to podcasters in the field, you're going to meet some great people in your field. You're going to expand your network. You're going to create friendships. You're going to meet really interesting, fascinating people.
So I got to ask you, man, why not start your own podcast?
All right, great question. We're going to reverse it to start because there's always, when you say why not do something, you need a reason to do something in the affirmative.
Okay.
So now as someone who gets people to get their podcast off the ground, please pitch me, right? Here's why you should do a podcast. And then I'll talk about why I don't think those reasons necessarily apply, or I will say, sign me up and let's do a podcast.
I mean, a podcast is a voice for your brand or business. A podcast is a personal expression. So let's start the question. What is a podcast? A podcast is a personally oriented discussion centered around select topics, right? That's Will Tarashuk original. You can take it. So the idea is, what are you doing? What are you talking about? It can talk about anything. And the big example I love to go to is Conrad Thompson. Now, if you don't know who Conrad Thompson is, he's a fat guy from Alabama who sells home mortgages. Why do I bring up Conrad Thompson? Because he is also one of the biggest wrestling podcasters in the world today. He's got 5 of them. And let me tell you how much money he's made selling mortgages on a wrestling podcast. A lot. And let me tell you, he also married Ric Flair's daughter. So he has even more on top of that. But he was doing fine before all of that. So if you're doing a podcast on what's something that interests you, just general.
Me personally.
You personally.
The topics of my book, professional development.
Okay. So let's say, do a solo show on this, whatever you would give away for free, that's a podcast. Like if I'm talking to someone who does sales, right? They're selling life insurance and they want to have a meeting with me. What would you tell that person for free? That's a podcast. Like a free consultation meeting for a business owner, that's a podcast. If you're doing realty and you're selling houses, that's a podcast. Here is the neighborhood. Here's some stats in the neighborhood. Here's some crime rates in the neighborhood. Here's the school districts in the neighborhood. Here's how they rank compared to other neighborhoods. Here's the price of the house. That stuff you would give away for free. That's a podcast. As soon as the house is off the market, you put a little note in the end of the podcast, like a solo episode. This house is off the market. Check out my other stuff. Right? So it is a tool. A podcast is a tool to sell whatever it is you have to offer. Or it's just a means to have fun. You're very easy to talk to. We can kind of delve off by, no, you're going to bring it right back to where I need you to go. You can almost say exactly what I'm going to say before I say it. I've only known you for 45 minutes. So a podcast can bring great value to you because 1, you have something to say, 2, you're interesting, and 3, you have something to sell. Why not have a podcast?
And remind me, what do I have to sell?
Well, you got your book, and you also got, you have this story of working with startups, so you could even target startups. Like, hey, I'm a startup. You could invite me on your podcast and go, okay, you're a startup. Tell me about your business. What are you looking for? And you can pitch some ideas like on the podcast, and after the podcast, you go, hey man, check out my website. Here's what I have to offer. Fill this out and maybe we can work together. If great, if you can, great. If you don't, thanks for the content. It's been great talking to you. Right? You have plenty of things to offer people.
So you hit the nail on the head. And I think the advice is great for anyone out there listening saying, hey, there's something I sell, a product or a service, and I want to reach a large customer base by selling this. Podcast is something you should consider. The reason I don't is I don't have as much to sell as most people in my position do. So someone like me normally says, well, I have a book, and then I'm going to consult. I'm going to be a consultant and offer this service. Now, the secret to publishing is that no one makes money on books. When you do the math, like Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, sure. But most of us, we're not making money from books. The way you make money when you have a book, particularly a business book like mine, is either you make money consulting based on the book or speaking. So I only have one thing to sell, the book. I do not actually consult on the topic in my book. It's not a lot of people, I'll be an HR consultant. I'll help your company figure it out. That's not what I do. In fact, I give away a lot of free content on my website, how your company can do it yourself. You don't need me. You don't need to hire me. Go do it yourself for free. So I don't have that to sell. What I basically do is either full-time as a CTO at a startup company. So there's usually one other than right now, we're doing the fractional work because I've been promoting the book. I'm with one company full-time, so I'm not selling my time. Or I do the speaking engagements. So now where the podcast would make sense, if I said, hey, hire me as a consultant and get to know me. Because then if you want to hire me, if you want to pay me thousands of dollars as a consultant, you have to build up that trust. How do I know I can trust Mark? Convincing you to spend 20 some dollars on a book. Okay, that's not too hard. You listen to me for a bit and you say, yeah, I'll invest $20. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. So for selling the book, going on other podcasts where I hit different audiences gets me that wide network. If I have my own, they say, okay, this Mark guy, he's interesting. Let me come back. Let me listen to him. Okay, he's interesting. I'll give him the $20 for the book. But then there's nothing more for me to sell them because they're not hiring me as a CTO.
Right.
And the speaking, now I do get hired as a speaker. That's typically done by executives or HR or conference organizers. But that's a very tiny targeted community. Most people out there listening to podcasts are not in a position to go spend 5 figures to hire someone like me to go speak at the event. So podcasting is probably not the most effective way to do that. So that's why I don't have a podcast. I think you're right that most people, when you have a service, so if you are a consultant, if you have a small business, that podcast is going to be a great way to build your brand, market your business. I recommend it. If you're mostly an employee, even an executive in my case, it may not be as appropriate for your business. You might do it because it's fun. Mm-hmm. You might do it for your personal brand. And you could argue, maybe if I'm a CTO, I should be doing a tech podcast and get known as this brilliant tech expert. So people always want to hire me as a CTO. But I'm less excited to talk about that on a podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you this then. Do you have an audience?
A little bit. I just started producing content fairly recently. I started blogging just because I said, I got to start putting out regular content. I have my social media posts. I'll post every time I do a podcast. I'll post now with the blog content I have. So I'll post about things going on.
Yeah.
But I started producing regular content as the blog. And I do recognize I could just read my blog and that becomes a podcast episode.
I tell people all the time, literally anything can be a podcast because the P stands for personal. It's whatever you want it to be. But I ask you if you have an audience because, if you already have an audience, then, people are going to listen to it. That attracts advertisers, right? That's another thing. A podcast can be another source of income for yourself. However, if you answer the question very little, you know what, man? I think you're 100% right. In terms of you as a person, as a brand, and as a professional, you don't see the ROI in it. And as someone who would love to work with you and would love to have you on APS, I don't see the ROI for you in it either. So I'm telling you honestly, I think you're making the right decision in not starting a podcast. However, if that audience starts to grow, keep it available. Because then if you have an audience, then it's not what are you selling. It's what can others sell them.
Right. And I agree completely. If I build an audience and I have some way that I'm interested in monetizing, and we use this broadly, I don't mean to think of the audience. No podcasters like, oh, look, there's little cash cows, right? But I have an audience.
It's a plus.
What things of value can I provide to the audience, and how can that create revenue for me to continue to do the podcast?
Yeah.
Then yes, it makes sense. And it might be true that in the future, as I build up my name, because, well, granted, there are tens of thousands of people who know who I am prior to the book, because I would speak at conferences. I've been teaching at universities. Lots of people knew who I was. I wasn't adding them as followers. I wasn't getting people to follow me around.
Right.
So now I'm, for the first time as an author, building that audience, that direct audience says, I am paying attention to what Mark's doing.
And it is a double-edged sword where, a podcast is a great way to also build an audience.